see is also a roadmap, not just to a Viksit Bharat or to how India will be a developed nation by 2047, but also to the next 5 years. It will be building on a lot of schemes that have already been announced and perhaps some new ones or new tinkering, keeping in mind political realities. Now, to get a sense of what industry wants from the budget becomes very, very crucial. And to do this, we're speaking today to the top brass of the CII. I'm joined by Mr. Sanjiv Puri, President CII, and of course, Chairman and Managing Director of ITC. Rajiv Memani with us today on the show, President Designate CII and Chairman and CEO of EY India. R. Mukundan, Vice President CII and Managing Director and CEO of Tata Chemicals with us. And Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General CII, speaking with us today. Now, CII has obviously put out its list of expectations from the budget. Representations have been made to the government as well, and those conversations are ongoing consistently through the year. But at this point, and let me begin the conversation with Mr. Sanjiv Puri. Mr. Puri, at this point, I suppose the biggest question on everyone's mind is, are we going to see the political realities and the election result in some way reflect into the budget? Simply put, are we going to see a greater push for consumption, towards employment, towards the rural sector? And would that be something which is in the best interest of the economy and industry as well?
Well, you know that right now the economy is in a very strong foundation. There are a lot of positives, and those positives are a result of a number of policy instruments that were brought about in the past. So really what I'm saying is the strategy adopted in the past has worked. It is in strengthening the competitiveness of the economy. It's creating jobs. Private sector investment is significant now. It is at 23.8% of GDP. I think the mood in India is quite positive. That is shown up also by the internal surveys of CII. So if you look at what is important from all stakeholders' perspective is creating quality jobs at scale. And the current process is already creating jobs. I think with the lag impact of some of the instruments that have been put in place, we should see that get better over time. And the question is really on what more can be done to create good quality jobs. That will be the real question to answer. So besides continuing the theme that's been on, I think there is an opportunity to provide impetus to certain labor-intensive sectors. And these include things like toys, apparel, footwear, wood-based industry, tourism, just to give a few examples. How can we, just like, PLIs have worked for certain sectors, so there is scope to provide similar impetus to an employee link scheme in the employment-intensive sector. I think that would be an important one to take care of. The second is that today, nearly half of India's workforce is in agriculture. Now, there we are dealing with two issues. We're dealing with the issue of lower incomes. It's also about in the economy ultimately better quality of incomes. And the second is the extreme risks on account of weather events. And that's what's been hampering the rural economy in the last years, and that's why the stress is felt in the rural economy. So how do we build resilience in agriculture? How do we kind of improve productivity in the agriculture? That gets back to the whole set of reforms that need to happen. And how do we bring technology into agriculture? There are some instruments already at play, but they need to be scaled up, and some more reform needs to happen. And a very important area that needs to be addressed from rural is this whole area of resilience in agriculture. And I think resilience issue is beyond agriculture. It is for urban infrastructure. It is for many more things. It's for water security, because today water itself is becoming an important area. So we need to address this issue of adaptation. So what we are recommending is setting up a national commission on adaptation. In fact, also a national mission on water. So we create water security for the society, for industrial establishments. So these are, all these areas actually go back into the area of economic growth, of creating good quality jobs. And therefore, this is what should be in the interest of all stakeholders. And we have seen in the past that this route is what has given the good results so far. And I think the outcomes of the past will only energize everybody to strengthen the past rather than deviate from it. Of course, I do agree that there may be some aspects of economic space in certain areas to be created, whether it's through some relief in income tax or whether it is higher Manrega wages or it is increase in the PM Kisan. So given that cost of everything has gone up not only in India but globally, I think it's important that some kind of relief is given to people at the lower end. That of course also needs to be dealt with.
Just speaking of the bottom of the pyramid at the lower end, and just a very quick follow-up to you, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, because you have the overview that perhaps few others will of what's really happening in the rural economy. And we keep tracking this day in and day out, sometimes through quarterly results, through commentary, through management, monthly numbers, etc. Are you seeing those green shoots and that turnaround actually coming in? Not just for the premiumized discretionary spends, but for actual staples in your space. And would that give some sort of relief to the government when framing policy?
So we are certainly seeing some green shoots. And I would say not just us, this is the commentary you've heard from several players in the industry. There are green shoots definitely visible. But I think the question really to answer is that how do you put rural into a much stronger trajectory? And as I said earlier, the challenge has been on account of weather events. Fortunately, the monsoon, the predictions so far are good this year. So hopefully the crop should be better. That will provide some impetus to rural India. But on a sustained basis, I think the issue is about how do we build resilience in agriculture? How do we create more non-farm jobs in rural India? Maybe the public capex that we are recommending, management of 25%, maybe can have a higher index to rural India. It's also a question of how do we develop the human capital of rural India so that they can participate in the opportunities that are emerging in the economy. There are companies today also talking about skill shortages. So is it time now to, given the better connectivity and both physical and digital, is it time now to create integrated rural development hubs which will house social infrastructure for human capital development, which will house the infrastructure for the entrepreneurship development, with of course private sector participation. It can be in a public-private mode, and private sector can also participate in developing the human capital in the rural areas. So I think these are some of the areas that could be looked at for creating a more sustained trajectory as far as rural India is concerned.
We were speaking earlier about putting more money in the hands of people, boosting consumption. And let me come to you on this point, Mr. Memani. Big expectations, but honestly, expectations are there every time, especially from the taxpayer's perspective, that there would be some relief. Things like ATC, Section ATC, those limits haven't been tinkered with in over a decade. Do you think that with the kind of comfort the government has right now because of the RBI dividend payout, there is scope to do this? Do you think that there could be a tendency or a leniency to do it? And is this what is required, to just give more relief to taxpayers? Or would there be other ways preferable to put more money in people's pockets?
Yeah. So, firstly, I agree with you. I think the government macroeconomic situation, the government balance sheet is strong. I think it's also stronger than what was projected in the vote on account, and both in terms of tax revenue collection is ahead of plan, especially in personal tax, and also in terms of we talked about the RBI dividends and other things. So I think government, if they would want to, I think this is a good year to do something. Whether they will do ATC or not, I doubt it, because they would want people to migrate to the new tax personal tax regime. So I think that's where they would want people to migrate. So my view is, if anything, they may add to the minimum threshold limit. So they may add to the rebate so that they can encourage more people to move to the new tax regime, which is slightly lower tax rates, but very few incentives and concessions. So that's what I think. In other ways of doing that, obviously not necessarily in the budget, but GST and GST reduction in some basic consumption items, or also in some items which sit in 28%. When there are items of sort of day-to-day consumption. So things like that can also be enabled, but not through budget. And Sanjiv talked about income transmission to rural India through various mechanisms. I think that's another area that they can be done. I certainly think that from what the budgeted estimates were, I mean, if you look at the total expenditure estimate, tax revenues were some 38-39 lakh crores. If you add everything else, you were looking at 43-44 lakh crores of total income that the government had said. My guess is it will probably be 3 to 4% higher than what was projected. So I think the government has the economic space, if they were, without adding any new taxes or tinkering with any tax rate. So the government has the flexibility of spending, 1.5 lakh to 2 lakh crores more than what has been estimated as expenditure. Where they're going to put that money will be an interesting question. Maybe some of it will be towards consumption. I would presume a lot of that will be for consumption, transmission of income, and one or two you could see some big scheme announcements that happen around healthcare or some other things, which will require budget allocation.
So just to follow up there, Mr. Memani, when you say towards consumption or transmission of income, what could that route look like? If you think it's not really going to be for the average taxpayer, then are you seeing that in the form of larger payouts in schemes to farmers, fertilizer subsidies, etc.? What is that picture looking like?
No, I'm not saying it won't go to the taxpayer. I'm just saying that what you had said through the ATC mechanism.
Okay, it'll be for the new tax regime. It will be for the new. Would it be fair to say that the new tax regime, despite several efforts and several budgets, has not really taken off? Right. Would that be fair to say?
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's not taken off to the extent they wanted, and I think if they were to provide any relief, then they would provide it in a way that takes off, because that's the intent of the government.
I mean, if the idea is to get people off the tax rebates, then you need more sweeteners there. All right, let's come back to the question of where the government can spend this money it now has, the RBI bonanza, as we've been calling it. And let me come to you, Mr. R. Mukundan, on this. So among the things that the CII has asked for is to increase capex to by 20% to 12 lakh crore rupees for 2024-2025. Now, in which direction would you like to see that capex going? What are the areas that you think need to be focused on?
Tamanna, really, I think the key opportunity for India, in my view, is becoming part of the global supply chain. That essentially entails that we put further stress on the logistics, put further stress on supply chain resilience, which means investments in ports, investments in railways, freight transportation, investment in air freight transportation, building freight corridors with the rest of the world. I think that is one big chunk of the capital expenditure which needs to happen. I think defense will certainly be an area where I think India can play a much bigger role in the global marketplace. Countries are ramping up their defense expenditure. It's an opportunity to become part of that supply chain. And I think if government can facilitate through big investments in that area and help the companies connect, I think that will be a great support. Also, I think creating the industrial zones which have additional investment from central government to the state in terms of creating those zones for electronics, basically the new areas of investment where private capital can come from both from international and domestic should be the key area. The other area to focus, as we have been maintaining, is to continue the effort on PLI as a startup investment to make sure that it plays into not just Indian market, but make in India for the globe. And these are all the opportunities government has to continue to up the investment. Lastly, I think there are some new avenues which sort of play into what Sanjiv has already highlighted, which is a green investment. upping the investment in the green area again, whether it is green power, water resilience. All these are areas where big infrastructure spends can push the resilience and also the efficiency and effectiveness of economic activity.
In terms of efficient spending or efficient boost to manufacturing, Mr. Mukundan, do you think that the PLI is the best way, the PLI scheme? Has it really delivered in terms of encouraging industry to set up more facilities, etc.? So would you like to see more of PLI or other avenues as well to boost manufacturing?
In terms of broadly, let me just say, if you look at spends in infrastructure itself, rupees spent on infrastructure usually yields almost 2.5 to 3 times the outcomes of the investment. And I think that needs to be continued focus. The PLI should be seen more like a startup, let's say, encouragement for the initial years, where government comes in and sort of reduces the ease of entry. But after that, the scale up has to be managed by private sector alone. And I think in many, many areas, the government actually has benefited a lot more than the PLI incentive which has gone in because of smart way of doing it. Several sectors have benefited, especially electronics. I think I think we got to focus on how to make it successful and see this as a effort to sort of accelerate an investment in this window of opportunity where India has, where it can become part of the global supply chain in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years or time. I think that acceleration is what we should focus on, rather than that becoming a permanent feature. PLI cannot be a permanent feature. It can be a feature in the initial years to give a push and acceleration to the investment.
So PLI cannot be a permanent feature. That's an interesting way of looking at it. Chandrajit, Banerjee, one of the things that is there in your representation and what the CII has talked about is a clear timeline, a schedule of disinvestment for the next 3 years. I found this particularly interesting because the government doesn't really seem in any mood for disinvestment. I mean, what we've seen so far, or the track record so far, seems to be more on let's find these state-run companies and fix how they run. And the way, for example, the stock markets are, welcoming this also leads into it. So I wanted to know why you were interested or why CII was keen on looking for a schedule for disinvestment.
Yes, we have seen some of the disinvestments work, and it's obviously we need to keep on the path of disinvestments and less government into business. And we have also seen, as you mentioned, that there has been in the track record that disinvestment targets not being met. And of course, there are issues at what is the right time to disinvest, etc. But having said that, there is no argument as to see which goes against that there should be continued and gradual disinvestment with targets met. And we do also, of course, appreciate that it is tough to, sometimes take the call as to whatever be the right time and which is the right company, which is the right sector, etc. But there are areas where it could be extremely important for the government to pursue it, given that there could be much healthier management of the company, or even not just and also revenue to the government. So we do sit on a large number of real estates which can be monetized very well, and that's where we see opportunity coming ahead. There are sectors like tourism, hotels, etc., which are areas where some of them are lower hanging fruits, so to say, where we can see a lot that can be done. Utilization in areas through getting greater private sector participation in the real estate that I mentioned that the government holds. So we should see greater efficiency coming in certain cases, and in certain cases greater utilization and also resources, financial resources coming into the government. And therefore, to see that path continue with targets which are realistic and whatever's possible at certain points in time would be important to see in the forthcoming budget and beyond.
Okay, so disinvestment target is still on track. I just want to come back to you, Mr. Banerjee, and want to get your view on something I actually started the show with, and I asked Mr. Sanjiv Puri this question on employment and how the budget can move towards generating employment. I think it's become even a bigger talking point with whatever's happened in the last 24 hours with one state government trying to push reservation in the private sector, then backing off after clearly no one thought it was a good idea. Do you think that a need for a structured plan to push employment generation of quality now becomes very clear, which goes beyond the numbers of what we see in EPFO, etc.? Quality jobs, and that's where the push seems to be.
Yes, of course. Actually, what we need is good quality jobs and livelihoods across the country and at scale. So a couple of points there. Number one, we have the labor codes, say, for instance, the labor reforms, which are going to be critical. And that really actually leads to greater jobs. And that needs to be taken forward by the states. Implementation needs to be taken forward by the states. So more consensus building, more addressing, and more better mechanisms of that consultation, like the GST Council provided mechanisms on the taxation side. That's required. That's number one. Number two, if you really look ahead, the entire piece of jobs, we have suggested ELI, employment-linked incentive schemes, for certain very critical sector where employment can be high, sectors like toys, textiles, furnitures, even tourism, logistics, areas which are beyond manufacturing, many sectors where we can see PLI type of schemes which can be triggers to see employment get generated fast. And within that, even a strong focus on female labor force participation, and where we can have a strong bias in terms of when we are incentivizing. The third point is, there are areas like the ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce. Mm-hmm. They can play a very critical role in providing market access to small enterprises. The point is, the smaller enterprises today stand at a great, they have a great opportunity, and that's the sector that we need to look at for employment. And when I say that, the allied point that comes is, how do you encourage small and medium companies to employ more, and incentivizing small and medium companies through through decriminalization, through easier way to do business. Those are going to be critical factors that one would see. And lastly, of course, rural non-farm, that's the rural enterprises, focus on rural non-agricultural businesses. And I think that's a very, very important area that one would like to see in the budget, then that boosts employment and also quality jobs, which can be provided to across the sections.
Okay, so yes, make it easier for people for companies to employ people, cut the red tape. And I was having a conversation earlier in the day with Manish Sabarwal, and he echoed some of these things as well. So now I'm being told that we're absolutely out of time, and we'll wrap it up right now. But let me just take one very quick round of views. One thing, and let me start with Mr. Sanjiv Puri. Everyone has a wish list, and then we have a list of what we think is going to be announced. Let me not ask you what you think is likely to be announced, but if there was one thing that you would hope to see from the budget in terms of announcements, what would that be?
Well, I would like to see that the whole path of growth that has been adopted in the past, I think a continuation of that, and really build up and adding some more layers to the growth story with the same philosophy of investment-led growth. That's what I would like to see.
Mr. Memani, your answer?
Yeah, no, I'm very similar to Sanjeev. I think if they follow the same macroeconomic discipline that they have, but use the surplus that they have this year, the kitty that they have this year, to transfer more money into rural India. I think that probably would be interesting to see, or at the lower income levels to create more economic space.
Okay, what would be desirable for you to see, Mr. Mukundan? And this doesn't have to be in the realm of what is likely to happen.
Yeah, I think this should be seen as the first 5 years in the next 25-year journey. And I think we should focus, as has been said, make it inclusive, make it sustainable, but continue to focus on growth with policy which is stable.
Mr. Banerjee, the last word to you on this.
No, I would, besides what has been said, if I want us to choose something different, I would really like to see the budget giving more space to the states. I think the next story of India, I always say, lies in the states of India. So getting the states to be involved in terms of carrying forward the reforms, coming to a consensus of reforms. So areas like agriculture, education, healthcare, water, all of it is actually states. So how do we get the greater involvement and participation of the states in the next story of India?
Absolutely. Get the states in, more of the same in terms of fiscal prudence. And of course, you have to bring consumption levels up in rural India as well. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. That was the CII point of view on what should be expected from the budget on our special budget countdown. Thank you to all of our viewers for joining us. Stay tuned. A lot more coming up on the other side.